Hey everyone, my name is Ksenia and happy holidays! So yeah, you guys, Merry Christmas if you celebrate, Happy Holidays. This is your yearly holiday video from me. It's a nice tradition and I'd like to keep it going on the channel. Usually for the holidays I do something that sums up the year in one way or the other. Last year I asked all of my creator friends to share their favorite wrestling moment of the year. The year before that I did predictions. So when it was time to decide what I should do for this year, I realized that this year was probably the biggest in my wrestling career and my career as a blogger on the whole. It was definitely not an easy year in any way, shape or form, but it was very fruitful, very productive and very life-changing, I guess you could say. I spent a lot of time in the US this year and I went to so many shows, I recorded so many interviews, met so many amazing people. So when I was thinking about how I should sum this year up, it was only natural that I do this. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna share with you guys five life lessons that I've learned this year in wrestling, regarding wrestling and about wrestling. Because I really do feel like this year was my biggest learning experience in wrestling to date. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Number one, the spectator in wrestling is an actor. Or to put it more simply, the crowd is a part of the show. And I know sounds very staple, sounds very simple, but stay with me here. I'm sure we've all realized that to one extent or the other when COVID hit and when we were faced with wrestling without crowds, pre-taped shows and wrestlers in the crowd instead of the actual crowd, and Thunderdome, that was a thing, all of that. However, I feel like this year, with crowds finally being back in full capacity, that is when we really realized that and really came to face that. And on the one hand, the wrestlers who spent a year or even over a year performing without a crowd, without having that sense of their organic stance, of their organic face or heel nature, have had to readjust to crowds and have had to rediscover themselves in a way. But also on the other hand, we were faced by formats, new formats, cool formats that proved themselves to be successful during COVID times, which I'm not saying COVID is over, but during the peak COVID times, result unfeasible and unsuccessful with the crowds back. Or maybe not necessarily successful, but definitely harder to execute. We see that now WWE is pretty much completely devoid of cinematographic matches, even though I love them and I think they're great. And again, I've mentioned in some of my other videos that cinematographic wrestling is not something that WWE came up with, or not something that only appeared in COVID times. Different promotions have been doing it for a while. If you're familiar with Riptide Wrestling, if you're familiar with Lucha Underground, you're no stranger to cinematographic matches. However, while those promotions have been able to perfectly execute those with crowds, WWE, with the scale that it operates on and with the capacity of the crowds that they need to sustain themselves, can't really do that. Also, after the first Stadium Stampede that AEW did, which I think was a freaking masterpiece, I loved it. We had so many discussions and questions about, oh, should it be an annual thing? Like, how are they going to do it next year? But then Double or Nothing came again, but this time with a full capacity crowd. The questions were different. The questions were, how are they going to do it with a crowd? Are we going to get to see it as a crowd? How are we going to get to see it as a crowd? Which I think AEW handled it pretty good. We saw a bigger part of it, I'm guessing pre-taped on the Titantron, and then they actually kind of like spilled out into the arena, which was a good way to do it, but pace-wise, for a live crowd, maybe probably not ideal, because when you're sitting there just looking at the Titantron for a while, you kind of start to lose this energy level, and then when it spills out, you're not as fired up as you should be by the end of a match that's large like that. So I do feel like it's a big question whether AEW is going to even do Stadium Stampede next year and how they're going to do it, because the first Stadium Stampede was an extreme success. It was extremely cool, overwhelmingly positive response. Second one, I personally loved it, and I think that with the crowd factoring in, they handled it perfectly, but a lot of people weren't as happy with it as they were with the first one. And as we come back into this normal rhythm of crowds being at every show, which is again very different because the crowd at Double or Nothing this year was a fresh crowd. It was the, I think, first full capacity wrestling crowd. We had full capacity at Dark the day before that too, I think. But like this AEW weekend was the first full capacity wrestling crowd after COVID. We were like 3 times as fired up as we would be at a normal show. So making sure that the crowd is engaged with the third Stadium Stampede is going to be a challenge, which AEW has overcome quite some challenges, so I guess we'll have to wait and see. But what I really learned is the crowd is not just a big part of the action. It really is an integral part of the entire puzzle that really could take away or add or influence the product or change the direction of a feud or of someone's character work, which again, we knew that before, but now it's just twice as evident. Another thing that made me really think about the crowd as an actor is the rebrand of NXT. I think it's great. I think it's great that a lot of younger athletes are getting TV time, are getting chances, and NXT has truly transformed into full-on developmental, which is not a bad thing. However, what NXT really lost with the rebrand wasn't the logo or the bigger part of its main event roster, but it was really the crowd. I personally know people who have been NXT regulars in Orlando since the beginning of time, since the beginning of televised NXT. And those people are leaving, man. Some of them were driven away by some of WWE's policies. Some of them just don't really want to watch it after a big chunk of, NXT's most beloved main eventers are gone, such as Adam Cole, Kyle O'Reilly, Bobby Fish. People just don't want to watch the product anymore since those people are gone, Johnny Gargano. Some people can't really get the feel of the format, possibly quite yet, and I know I'm one of those people. I try to watch it semi-regularly, but honestly I cannot grasp what it's supposed to be quite yet. Again, not saying it's bad, I'm just saying that I don't really get it yet. And honestly, since the rebrand, NXT hasn't really been able to compete with AEW, which I know we hear that it was never really the goal, like NXT wasn't even supposed to really compete with AEW, but we would always compare them because they seem to have similar audiences since NXT for WWE fans. As a lot of people said, watching NXT and not watching main brands was a kind of like an inside rebellion against WWE, and AEW provided an alternative for that rebellion. So we would always compare them anyways. So now it really doesn't feel like NXT can compete with AEW rating-wise. I feel like what they really lost and what was the really important thing that they don't have anymore is the core NXT crowd. And it's debatable whether it was even a good thing that they built such a consistent crowd around them. I personally don't think it's a good thing because it also starts to influence the product as well when you do tapings in one place all the time. And AEW kind of experienced that when they had shows in Jacksonville throughout COVID. You get this audience that's very acquainted with the product, but also a little bored with it, but also has its own very specific preferences that couldn't have developed if it wasn't this same crowd all the time, and that the TV audience really doesn't get and doesn't need. However, it is what it is. NXT did build this very consistent, tight fan base, and now they're losing it, and it's evident. Number 2, this year I learned that photography and videography are a huge part of the wrestling culture. Which again sounds pretty obvious, but it really dawned upon me this year. I've always been a fan of wrestling photography, and especially recently this year, I developed this newfound appreciation of film photography when it comes to wrestling, because I feel like it's a perfect match. Because film photography, I feel like, really captures moments instead of pictures, and I feel like that's perfect for wrestling. So I've always been a fan of some select wrestling photographers, and a lot of wrestling photographers that I know and love produce freaking art. And I am really, really glad that mainstream wrestling is catching up to that. And I know that specifically during Full Gear Weekend, AEW gave opportunities and platforms to a lot of internet famous wrestling photographers, including Brainbuster, Beyond Gorilla, that we all know and love. Beyond Gorilla has also done vignettes for PAC that were featured on AEW, which I think is also amazing, because it's high time that wrestling actually treats vignettes and promos as digital art, as exactly what it is. And I've had wrestling as performance art in my bio for the longest time, but I really do feel like a lot of aspects of wrestling are art in themselves as well. Wrestling documentaries is a whole different genre as well, and WWE has been doing documentaries for a while, and I'm gonna go on record and say that WWE's documentaries are amazing. WWE has mastered this art of staying somewhere on the brink of kayfabe that I really, really admire. And in some of my interviews that aren't like outwardly shoot, I love to balance on this like knife edge of kayfabe and shoot. And I feel like with wrestling and with its kayfabe aspect, documentaries in wrestling are a whole art again in itself, because there's just such a large spectrum of the degree of kayfabe that you can operate with, and each degree of kayfabe that you can operate with implies a certain different approach, and to me that's so fascinating and I love it. And you know, guys, that I've done some mini documentary type of things, and honestly next year I would love to venture out more into the sphere of wrestling, and I would love to do more documentary-ish stuff. And I would also love to work with people in wrestling who do documentaries now, just throwing that out into the universe. One YouTube channel that I really want to shout out and that I found this year is Indie Handshake. Those people produce quality mini documentaries, like amazing. Also, a lot of wrestling photographers are doing zines. I know that Brainbuster has just released one, which also gonna leave the link somewhere. Brainbuster is amazing. And also, I was lucky enough this year to be photographed by 2 out of my top 3 all-time favorite wrestling photographers. I got photographed by Brainbuster after first wrestling in Minnesota, which I have no words. I'm at a loss for words. This is just amazing. Also got to be photographed by 35mm Wrestling Kevin, who is again also one of my absolute favorite wrestling photographers. So it's an amazing feeling. And by the way, the third one in my top 3 is Beyond Gorilla. So if you're watching, and since we're talking about digital art, another thing is edits, because like one thing is fan cams, obviously those are great, but they can't really work with kayfabe that much. Another form that I've discovered this year was artful edits of matches, and there's this account on Instagram called Puro Dead. Hope I'm not butchering the name of the account. This person makes those really amazing, emotional, engaging edits of wrestling matches. So that's another thing that I didn't really know was a thing, but it's a thing and it's a beautiful thing. Number 3, there is life beyond WWE, and now we can say it confidently. We've been talking about how WWE might not be the ultimate goal eventually for wrestlers, but I feel like now, specifically after this year or this past 2 years, we can 100% say that there is life outside of WWE. Because I remember there was a point in my life when I was a fan, when I was watching, and whenever one of my favorite wrestlers would get released, it felt like the end of the world. It was like, I'm not gonna see them again. And I know most of them went to the Indies or went to Impact or wherever, but those didn't really feel relevant enough and didn't really feel like it would be a way for you to connect with them and their character works the same way that you would do with WWE. Now it's almost like people wait on WWE releases. People want wrestlers to go to AEW. People want wrestlers to go to New Japan. People want wrestlers on the indies to actually do tours and actually do signings and actually do interviews, again, as a creator. And now it's just the complete opposite. Now whenever a wrestler gets released by WWE, which again, releases, I say this a lot, releases are never happy times. Releases are never fun, because in the end of the day, it's people losing their jobs, it's people losing their stable source of income. So I would never treat releases lightly, but especially when it comes to like the hotter wrestlers, the hotter free agents, it's almost exciting. And honestly, people, are starting to complain that, oh, everyone goes to AEW, but I personally love seeing some of the ex-WWE talent in AEW, because first of all, they aren't ex-WWE guys. A lot of those people are more of ex-ROH guys or ex-New Japan guys. There was life before WWE too, so. But also, I really feel like they can really flourish and they can really have, again, we say this a lot, creative freedom. But as someone who has interviewed a lot of AEW/AEW related wrestlers this year, every single person mentioned creative freedom. And this freedom makes talent flourish, and it's a beautiful thing. And we've seen that with WWE too, strangely enough, because we had our first in history WrestleMania weather delay. And we saw wrestlers cut unscripted promos, and those were so good. And I think they even cut them out in the Peacock repeats, which is such a shame. But it's so evident, even in this small tiny example, that wrestlers, as Artists, as performers, as creators, flourish when you let them. Flourish when you let them express their creative vision the way that they want to. But also, it's not just about ex-WWE guys going to AEW. My favorite example here is Matt Cardona, because he even tweeted that WWE was his developmental, and I felt that was so badass. But also very true, his career is on the rise. Unlike ever, I feel, even though he did have his peaks with his YouTube channel and then with his WrestleMania moment, sure, but the way that he is now as a performer, as a storyteller, is unmatched. I cannot wait to see more stories like that of people leaving WWE, not necessarily signing with another major company and with the alternative, but still flourishing and still making their careers amazing and successful and incredible to watch, like Cardona does. But also we're in the generation of indie wrestlers who do not strive to get signed by WWE or even AEW. I know that even financially, some of those indie wrestlers that are the indie darlings and that you know and that don't want to get signed make better money than some NXT people. So, like, what's even the point? I'm really excited to see more of this freedom of creative expression in wrestling. It's very exciting. It's an exciting time to be a wrestling fan. Number 4, it's never too early and never too late to be in wrestling. We also live in a very polarizing time in regard to that. Because WWE is saying under 25, over 6 foot. We live in the generation where there's so many super young, successful wrestlers. There are people in WWE holding titles who are under 25. There are people on the indies who are the famous indie wrestlers and the indie darlings who are 16, 17, 18, 19. And it's crazy to see, and it does get a little, again, stressful when I myself am over 25 and just slightly over 25. It gets depressing to have this whole pressure on you where the major company in the world, the goal for a lot of people goes like, no, we don't want you because you're old. And then you look around, you meet people at shows, you meet workers, you meet other creators, and freaking everyone is 21, or so it feels. On the other hand, there is no freaking limit, and you can really tell. We see a lot of people just getting into wrestling or wrestling adjacent stuff when they're over 30, and people are getting opportunities of their lifetime and feuds of their lifetime and matches of their lifetime when they're over 30 or even over 40. And it's interesting because sometimes those two flip sides work for the same wrestler in a way, because we saw Mickie James get released from WWE because apparently they were treating her as this like older, I guess, superstar, which is bullshit, because a lot of the current WWE champions are in the same age group as her. No one is bothered by that because they're a man. But now I feel like she's flourishing as ever. She's been a great asset and she's in Impact and she's elevating, I wanted to say the women's division, but she's elevating Impact on the whole. So really, in the end of the day, when it comes to wrestling, age is just a number. And number 5, the shift from a business to a community. And I'm not saying this 100% confidently either, because this debate of is wrestling a business, is wrestling a family, is wrestling a community is still very much alive and well. This year, I really felt the community aspect of it, and I really feel like recently it's been more of a thing in wrestling where people stand up for each other, protect each other, and make it their priority to try and make wrestling a safe, loving, welcoming place for everyone. And specifically this year, I got this amazing opportunity to be on a panel at LA Comic-Con that discussed mental health in professional wrestling. And that in itself is a marker of a better time, because I feel like we've been having a lot more conversations about mental health, about body image, about substance use, about burnout in wrestling, which is super important to have those conversations, because at the end of the day, we're all human. A wrestler can't be good and well unless the human behind the wrestler is good and well. And we've had way too many sad history lessons in that. That platform was hosted by Gentleman Jervis, who shortly after that revealed that Jervis has been sharing his body with Kevin Condren for over a decade, and he does a lot for the community side of wrestling, and he believes that wrestling is a community more so than a business. I usually refer to it as a business, honestly, because as a PR professional with a higher education in PR, new media, and journalism, and again, as a creator, as a blogger, as a journalist, it's really hard to step away from the business aspect because I deal with the business aspect a lot. But this year, a lot of things and a lot of people have really made me think that there is no business aspect without the community aspect. And again, unlike any other sport, there's way more of a divide in other sports. There are sports clubs, there are teams. It's way less of a mix. While in wrestling, it's on the one hand, every wrestler, if you're an indie wrestler, is for themselves. But on the other hand, that creates this very human relationship within the industry that is also easy to corrupt, which is another thing. But also I feel like since wrestling is so much more human-based, human-centered, human-oriented than any other sport, it's only fair that we create a healthy community, a mentally healthy community, a physically healthy community, a socially healthy community. There is no business without the community. And I feel like it's an important thing to think about, to stop and think about, to ask yourself, to ask others. I feel like it's our job as any single person who works in wrestling to remember that we're surrounded by humans just like us, and to remember that our actions affect other people and ultimately affect the product too. So be kind to each other and be kind to yourself too. And what a sweet note to end this video on. And I hope this sparked some thought for you too, or gave you some food for thought. Yeah, happy holidays to all of you. And I want to take this opportunity to wish you guys all the best in the next year and to wish you that all your dreams come true, like mine have been coming true this year. And give this video a like, subscribe, tap the notification bell to never miss any of the exciting uploads that are coming next year. A lot of interviews, a lot of vlogs that I've yet to release. Find me on my social media. I'm at Ksenia Did That on almost any platform. And until next time, goodbye, love you all.